Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Zarov's chess channel, and welcome to the TCEC Season 18 Super Final between the two top engines, Leela C Zero and Stockfish. So after 19 plus something rounds, Stockfish is in a comfortable 7-point lead. It's really an incredible tournament for Stockfish. Stockfish really brutalized Leela C Zero in this super final. But the beauty of the tournament goes simply to Leela C Zero. I believe in the round 65, we have witnessed one of the best chess games that have been ever played in chess history. In this round 65, Leela C Zero played an immortal queen sacrifice, an immortal Zugzwang motif, decoy, deflection, overload, great tactical motifs, and I believe really that this is really one of the best chess games that you will see or have seen in your life. So, but the funny thing about this game is that I skipped this video. I am following this TCEC Season 18, and I only followed the couple of last games. Wanted to publish something, maybe a win by Stockfish, but then the other day my brother-in-law, the famous Antonio, came over to my apartment. We live in two apartments next to each other, and he asked me, "Did you see the game between Leela C Zero and Stockfish?" And I said, "No, I didn't know what he was talking about." And he said, "You have to cover this one because it's really one of the best chess games." And that's why first, thank you, Antonio, for suggesting me this game, because I would for sure skip this game. I wouldn't notice it that it has been played. So be prepared. Really, this is a brutal chess game. So d4 played by Leela C Zero. Stockfish responded with knight to f6. We have c4, e6, and after knight to f3, the counter Nimzo Indian setup. We don't want to have the spinning idea. We don't want to play the move knight to c3. Then after bishop takes c3, the pawn structure would be doubled on the c file. So that's why here after the move bishop to b4, we'll still have the opportunity to cover with the knight. We don't have to cover with the bishop because we want to stay with our bishops on the board. And in the game, casting play by Stockfish. We have a3. It would be a risky idea here for black to immediately give up the bishop pair in such an early stage of the game, because if you want to give up the bishop pair in an early stage of the game, you have to provide some statics. You want to provide really a static position. I'm not sure after potential bishop to d2 that the position will be static, although black could occupy maybe the e4 square, but still it's a risky choice. So that's why here bishop to e7 played by Stockfish. The idea behind this bishop to b4 and then bishop to e7 idea is simply to make this knight a little bit weird here, because you don't want to have your knights placed like this in this reloading system. You want to have of course your knight on the most active square. It's the knight, square c3, so that you could maybe play something like e4. But you see the knight on d2 is a little bit blocking out the dark square bishop, so that's why this is still common theory. And in the game, e4 played by Leela C Zero anyway, and now we have d5. Here black really cracks the position in the center immediately. One of the best ways here to proceed is to move e5. After knight to d7, we have now bishop to d3 and now c5. And here comes really the best way now to proceed. I have won many games, even blitz game, bullet games, even classical games in this particular line with the move h4. This is already a tricky idea here by white to deliver this so-called Greek gift here on h7, followed with knight to g5. So that's why this move h4 comes with the idea that you would have the support on the g5 square. Let's see a possible continuation if black plays something dubious like c takes d4. Then we have really a great tactic: bishop takes h7, after king takes h7, knight to g5. If you take here, for instance, bishop takes g5, then h takes g5, after something like king to g8, g6 or king to g8, the game is over, because you have simply queen to h5, creating this immediate checkmate threat. In order to escape from this threat, black could try maybe the move f6, but now after g6 you're covering really this important f7 square, and the black king cannot escape. It's gonna be a checkmate in one in the next move. So here black could try to go with the king to g6, but now again queen to h5. The king has to move here to f5, and now g4 is a possibility. There are no good squares. f4 leads also into checkmate. If you try king takes e5, then you can get queen to h2, and again it's checkmate. So you see the Greek gift idea here is very dangerous. So that's why black has to cover with the move g6. with that move, at least black has solved the tactical problems for a while. Black could go also with the move h6, but then you are a little bit vulnerable to ideas like bishop to b1 and then followed with queen to c2 are also dangerous checkmate threats. So that's why here g6 was played, and now we have castling. This is a common idea in this setup, to sacrifice the pawn here, because in some occasions, if black takes out this pawn and doesn't secure maybe a defensive setup here after potential bishop takes h4, knight takes h4 could be an idea, will not be played in this game, but you notice if black gets rid of this dark square bishop, then you have always this dark square problem around the king, so white would continue here with the dark square bishop, so black could be vulnerable on dark squares here in the continuation of the game. So in the game, knight to c6 was played by Stockfish. We have knight to b3 protecting our d4 pawn. In the game, bishop takes h4 anyway, so far if we play knight takes h4, queen takes h4, we couldn't play on this idea to play with our bishop immediately to h6. We would be forced to kick away the queen, but in this particular position I think that black could defend somehow, remaneuvering the knights, getting the knights in front of the king somehow, maybe somewhere here, and try to protect the king on this dark square. So here in the game, after the move bishop takes h4, that's why Leela C Zero played the move bishop to h6, attacking the rook, rook to e8, and now rook to e1. A very important move, because our main advantage in the position is now this pawn on the 5th rank, which really paralyzes a little bit black's king side. And the problem is now, if we lose, for instance, the d4 pawn, you see these knights are attacking twice this e5, so you don't want to lose this pawn. If you lose this pawn, you will probably lose the game. So here, after the move c takes d4, Leela C Zero sacrifices another pawn and plays simply queen to c2. So far, Leela C Zero has sacrificed 2 pawns. In the game, d takes c4, we have bishop takes c4, and now knight to b6. We have rook to d1, and you see now this great attacking formation by Leela C Zero. All of the pieces, although down 2 pawns, but are really in great attacking formation. The knight has a good activity, the knight has also great activity, bishop is good, queen is good, bishop is good on c4, and the rooks are of course on this most active files here on the d and d file. So in the game, bishop to d7, if we play something like knight takes c4, then we can simply take queen takes c4, and in the next move you will lose the pawn on d4. The rook will come very active into the game. The bishop is a bad piece here. The bishop is blocked out by its own pawn, so we could have some troubles here on the d file. So that's why here Stockfish decided not to take the bishop on c4, not inviting this knights and the rooks to come into the game, because you need this knight, I think, on b6 in order to maybe close the d file if the position allows it, maybe with something like knight to e7 and then knight to d5. In the game, bishop to d7 was played by Stockfish. We have knight to c5, and now rook to c8. It seems now that Leela C Zero could go with knight to b7, but it's not such a powerful idea, because you get simply queen to c7, and it seemed to me that the fork idea could work here, but it's really a bad idea, because you have simply knight takes e5. You see your knight is hanging, as I said, you shouldn't lose this pawn on e5. Here, after knight takes e8, we could simply play this in-between check, knight takes f3, after g takes f3, bishop takes e8, and now b3 is a necessary move, because there are some tactics on the c file, so that's why knight takes c4, maybe after b takes c4, and now bishop to f6. I think that black has a better game, because you see white's king is still vulnerable to our attacks. This bishop will come into the game. The f3 is a weakness. The queen can also somehow get into the attack, so it's really a bad king position here. It's the white's king is really vulnerable to black's attack, so it wasn't played, of course, in the game, but I wanted to see what happens if we take this pawn on c7. So the evaluation here, you can put this position into an engine, is winning for black. So rook to c8, so Leela didn't play knight takes b7, played simply b4. The idea behind this move is to fix the knight here, because the knight is a little bit loose on the board. There could be some tactics by the rook on the knight and the queen, of course, because many pieces are on the c file. Here in the game, knight takes c4 finally was played. After queen takes c4, we have bishop to e7. The idea behind this move is to get rid of this annoying knight, in the game, knight takes e4 was played, so Leela C Zero attacks further the dark squares. As I said, we want first of all to get rid of this bishop, which is the key defender of dark squares, and there are some great attacking possibilities with maybe knight to f6 if this bishop wouldn't be on the board. And here comes, I think, the critical moment of the game. Here Stockfish played, of course, knight takes b4. This is really a great discovered attack on the queen, and you could maybe go with something like queen takes d4. Maybe this is playable for both sides, but here in the game, Leela C Zero plays an immortal, really an immortal queen sacrifice with the move queen takes b4. Really forcing now black to take. Bishop takes b4 after a takes b4. We have now a new position in which white has two pieces for the queen, but the dark square problems are really something that black needs to care of, and I'm not sure how to continue this game. There are now several choices here for black. Black could go maybe with rook to c4, but here knight to f6 is very tricky. If you try queen to b6, you see, pardon me, you have to first escape with the king. Then here we could play the move rook to e4. That's the main tactical threat, because here after rook takes h4, if you could just imagine, and bishop to g5, we could create some immediate checkmate threats here on h7. So this is the problem with maybe some bishop to g7, bishop to f8 ideas, simply playing on this h7 weakness and creating a checkmate with the knight and the rook. So I'm not seeing a good way how black should make progress here. There are also some other choices. Black could try maybe here to move queen to b6, but again you get knight to f6 and you lose another piece here, the bishop on d7. If you try something like queen to c7, then again we could play knight to f6. After king to h8, we could play rook takes d4 with a similar idea to play rook to h4, and again some checkmate threats here on h7. Even knight to g5 is a possibility. So you see, all of these pieces would be simply dancing around black's king. It's game over. So that's why after the move a takes b4, here Stockfish plays a very interesting defensive idea. Stockfish played the move f5. The idea behind this move is, after at e takes f6 en passant, we would simply try maybe to get somehow back, or maybe we could try to play rook to f8 or create some kind of a blockade. But the most important thing is that we have taken the square for the knight. The knight is very dangerous here on f6. So that's why Leela C Zero didn't react after the move f5, played simply this idea, knight to f6. This is very important to play with this knight on that square. Okay, here again black has several choices, but the best way here is to proceed king to h8, because if you play king to f7 here with the king, then you have knight to g5, again a new check, and it would be game over. So that's why king to h8. The problem now about this move king to h8 is that there are always these checkmate threats on the 8th rank. If you could just imagine, if black wouldn't have the rooks, the queen on the board, then rook to d8 or rook to e8 would be immediate checkmate threat, because the bishop is covering the g7 square. I'm telling you this because it will be very important in the continuation of the game, because there are this back rank tactics. Here in the game, rook takes d4. You see this rook comes very active into the game, and the bishop is now hanging. Whatever you do, you could escape maybe with the queen, but we will simply take the bishop. We don't want to take the rook. That's not the point here. We don't want to give up our great piece, which is of course the knight on f6. We want to take the bishop and again create checkmate threats here on h7. So in the game, that's why rook to c7 was played, and here Leela C Zero simply double ups on the d file. Here the rooks are again aiming, and you are really forced to play the move rook to e7. Now comes very nice move b5. The problem about this move b5 is now you can of course take bishop takes b5 is not an option. You lose the queen. If you try something like a6, that's the problem. You get simply b6, and the rook has to move somewhere, and again you will lose your let's see, possible rook to c6. Here rook takes, after rook takes d7, you have to move somewhere the queen. You see, you cannot move the queen to g8, and again this idea to play rook takes h7 is game over. So here after the move a5, that's why Stockfish played the move b6, and now king to h2. A very nice move also by Leela C Zero, because we don't want to have some checkmate threats or maybe some check threats on the first rank. We are hiding with our king a little bit. We don't have the problems on dark squares because we still can cover with a pawn here on f4 or maybe with our bishop. So this king is now perfectly secured. Now it's time to again strike back. So rook to b7, you see knight to g5, simply improving the position of the piece. What you don't want to do, of course, is to take the pawn, because and the problem is now that the move knight to g5 followed with rook to h4 doesn't work anymore, because the rooks are covering the 7th rank, so there are no more checkmate threats on the 7th rank. There are maybe some tactical threats on the d file and also on the 8th rank. So now at least Stockfish has solved the problems of the 7th rank. We have queen to c8 and now rook to d2. Again, this idea bishop takes b5 doesn't work, because you get simply rook to d8 and it's game over. You have to lose the queen. So that's why in the game here rook to c7 was played. And now we come to a very funny position, which is a Zugzwang position. Black doesn't have good moves. You see this knights are restricting all of the pieces. If a rook moves here, then again we'll simply take the bishop. You see the bishop cannot move, this rook cannot move back on the 8th rank, again you lose the bishop. So we have now an immortal Zugzwang position after an immortal queen sacrifice. Great attacking formation here by Leela C Zero. After the move rook to c7, rook to d6 was played. Leela C Zero simply improves the position of the pieces, simply moves higher now in the on the 6th rank. Now the rook is very annoying here in the game. Rook to b7 was played, and now rook to d4. We have rook to c7 and now rook to d1. Here Leela C Zero did some perpetuals, didn't find maybe the winning plan. Here after the move rook to b7, rook to d4 was played, and now again this idea rook to c7. Here Stockfish really hopes for a draw, but now finally Leela C Zero found this idea how to win this game, played simply f4. The idea behind this move again is to fix the pawn structure, again waiting to see what black will do. In the game rook to b7 was played, and now comes knight takes e6. Another great and brutal sacrifice. Again, if you take here with the bishop, you get this same tactical threat, rook takes d8. So that's why here rook takes e6 had to be played, but now knight takes e6. You don't want to take, of course, with the rook. The problem is then you get rook takes f6 and you will lose the rook. So here after knight takes d7, we have now a new position in which again white has two minor pieces for the queen, but this queen is really out of game. The rooks are not connected. We have really a lack of harmony of pieces here of blacks. They are really dislocated all over the board. White on the other hand has really a great activity again on the d file. Here king to g8 was played. Again this idea knight to f6. If rook takes f6, it's not such a powerful idea. Here e takes f6 will be played. Again some tactical possibilities here on the d file. Bishop to g7 could be played, so again it will be game over. So in the game after knight to f6, king to f7 was played, and now rook to d8. Kicking away the queen from the 8th rank. In the game queen to c5 was played, and now knight takes h7, rook to e8, and now a very again cool move by Leela C Zero, e6. If you try king to e6, you will be lost here, because we simply have rook to e1, king to f7 has to be played. Again this idea knight to g5, wherever you move, maybe king to f6, but now rook to e8, and after something like rook to e7 we have rook to e6. It's a checkmate. So great tactics that Leela C Zero has prepared to, but you see how important it was to get this king on h2. Great defensive strategy. And now here in this position after the move rook to e8, as said, e6 was played. We have rook takes e6, but now knight to g5, the fork on the king and the rook. We have king to f6, and now simply rook to f8. If you try something like king to e7 in order to escape, that's not a good choice, because you get rook to f7. You have to move and again we'll simply take this rook. We will double up here on this 7th rank, and again it's game over. So that's why after the move rook to f8, Stockfish was forced to give up the queen. Queen takes f8. We have bishop takes f8. We have now a new position in which Leela C Zero has two minor pieces for the rook, but still this king is endangered. You see, this bishop and the knight are restricting the king's ability to play, because there is always this threat to play something like rook to d7 followed with rook to f7, and it would be a checkmate. So these rooks are again zugzwanged. Again, black doesn't have a good move with the rook, so it was really an immortal zugzwang. First with this queen on the board, now without the queen, even the rooks cannot move now. Great attack. So rook to c7, we have a rook to d4, rook to b7, we have king to g3, simply improving the position of the king, rook to c7, and now rook to d3. Again, Leela C Zero searches for improvements, trying to see how to win this endgame. After rook to c7, we have king to g3, and now rook to c4, played by Stockfish. Now comes this idea, rook to d7. Now there is this immediate checkmate threat on f7, so that's why rook to e3 had to be played by king to f2. We have rook takes f4, king takes e3, the rook is hanging, you have to move the rook, and now after bishop to e7, king to e5, king to f3, and in this position Stockfish resigned. There's simply too much material. Leela C Zero has two extra pieces, and it was game over. So, but let's go back really to this moment. Great queen sacrifice. Okay, here after knight takes b4, we have queen takes b4, bishop takes b4, and now you see knight to f6. This problems on dark squares were simply too much to handle. This rook came very active into the game. Rook to d4 followed with rook from e to d1. It was, for me at least, really one of the best chess games of all time. Maybe you can write your comments on that. Maybe you can be the judge of this game, because it was really an immortal chess game. So, okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I enjoyed it really a lot. If you want to see more games like this, check out my other commented chess games played by computers. Here's the link. And if you want to see the best chess games played by humans, you can check out my series, the best chess games of all time. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.